Okay, so Gary, I'm doing a new segment where I'm going to ask you a question that doesn't really fit into our whole interview and all that kind of jazz, but I wanted to ask it to you because I feel like you've got some really good insight on it. Why do most, if not all, tech people think that everyone else in the tech field is stupid or dumb, or whatever you want to say it?
Well, of course, it's because we are the smartest ones in the room, right? I think every tech guy
Yeah,
feels like they know more, or they're the smartest guy, or their way is the best way, or because they were taught by so and so that, of course, that is correct and applies to every application, right? You know,
right.
um, but yeah, wow, what a common thing. I'm sure you've never run into that, right?
No, not at all. Like never, ever, ever have I run into that. I honestly, I was really glad you were there. The last time I actually had it happen, we had a client that was very much like asked that question of like, well, who's to say that the next person that comes in, isn't going to say that you're stupid and don't know what you're talking about? And I was like, oh, I fully expect that to happen. Just that's the
Absolutely.
reality of like our industry. And I think she was actually pretty taken back by it because we just kind of like
Yes.
leaned into it. We're like, yeah, they will. And I was like,
Yep.
but I personally feel, and I mean, you talk to this as well, like there's so much unknown that we don't know going into someone else's project afterwards. Like, was there budget cuts? Like, what was he told or she told? Like, what
Yep.
criteria were trying to be filled, type thought process. And I know you have I always ask you to share your Breslin Center story because I think that that's such a good, like, it's such a good thing because like you were able to in the moment have both of those, like, what in the world and oh, I now understand this all in the same time. That's why I ask you to share it all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things, I think I was in my 30s when this, all came down. It was like 1999 or 2000, something like that. And walked into the Breslin Center project, and we're going to redo the system. And I walk into the amp room, and there's racks and racks and racks and racks and racks of amplifiers, which I expected because there's all these delay speakers and everything else. But there's also like 24 channel delay units that are all set to different delay times. And I'm like looking at it and I'm like, what in the world is this? And I'm like, why would you have this? And then there's like this rudimentary, you know, computer, if you'd call it that. It was basically a matrix switcher that you could, recall different settings. And what it was basically doing was rerouting the input through those delays to go hit the amplifiers and out to the speakers. Well, it happens that the center cluster at the Breslin Center can move from the center down to one end if they're doing graduation, or to, one side of the arena, so forth. So they had like four different locations this cluster would live. And those delays then were there so that when they move the cluster, you hit the preset and the delay would work. But in the moment, and again, we're putting in a brand new media matrix system. In fact, at that time, it was like the largest media matrix system in the world, and I'm so excited. And I'm like looking at it, I'm like, who's the idiot that designed this? And then I stepped back for a minute and I went, wait a minute, this building was built in 1989. Who's the genius that came up with this? It
Yeah.
was just like that. Wow. Again, once I had context and go, what was the technology available in 1989?
Yeah.
This actually was brilliant.
Yeah, like being able to look through the mirror, like the lens of what existed then versus what exists now, because like now it's really hard. Like I've had clients that like they get a new tech director and they come in and they're like, why in the world did you sell the church a D Live when we
Hmm.
could have done an Avantis? And it's like, well, the Avantis didn't exist when we sold the D Live, and
Right.
the SQ wasn't powerful enough for what we were trying to do. So that's where we landed. Like, if the Avantis existed, you're totally right. Like, we could have done an Avantis, it would have been fine. But, like, it didn't exist. So, and then it's like, oh, okay. So it kind of, like, same kind of thing. Like, who's this idiot to, oh, this makes sense. Type thought
Yeah.
process.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I mean, I could talk through, and you lived through at least part of it, but system design wise, it used to be, particularly for house of worship, it was, all about point of geometric origin. So we'd put in a center cluster, and everything had to come back to that point of geometric origin. Yeah, that was like,
yeah.
the whole thing. And then we started getting, more and more, for lack of a better term, kind of rock and roll in church. And we started doing some, left right arrays. And for a while there, we were doing this thing called left, center, right, which sounded really cool. And it was actually really cool until you tried to mix on it. And, even I mixed on some of the systems that I designed and was like, this probably wasn't the best idea, but again, it was the technology we had at that time, and things that we were using.
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Yeah, I just wanted to ask that question because, like, I feel like that's like a mindset that we all kind of have at some level or at some time, and I feel like it's never really super talked about, and it's like I kind of want to talk about it and kind of get that out. So if you do find yourself in this place where you're saying, "Wow, what idiot did this?" Take a step back, like think through this and go, "Is there a reason why this could have been done?" Right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many things, budget, bad explanation of the project, you know, you
Former
name it,
technical director that had very
yeah,
specific opinions in the integrator. I mean, you and I've been in that situation before where the guy is just like, I am going to do it this way. And we look at each other and we say, do we do this project? Don't we do this project? And how can we help shepherd this to make it the best we possibly can?
yeah, 100%. So, all right, awesome. Just wanted to kind of get that out of the way.
That was fun.
Okay, so let's get into the real interview. Gary, you are a father, a husband. You have spent time as technical director, one of the first technical directors in the country. You have spent time as a integrator, as a salesman. You've dabbled in construction. You're doing repping now for audio stuff. You've kind of done every aspect and corner of the AV industry. Did I miss anything? Anything you want to touch on about yourself?
Thank you for thank you for making me feel very old, though. I do appreciate that. You're very good at that. I prefer to say I'm seasoned, but yes.
Hey, I didn't say you were old. I was just saying all the things you've done. You could have bounced around those positions for like 5 years or 45 years.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Now I've been very lucky. I've had a very, very, great career and have done, multiple different things as you've mentioned, and thankfully have loved every one of them as I've been doing it.
Yeah. And we've known each other. I actually was trying to think, when did we officially meet? I feel like I've known you for close to 15 years now. Does that feel about right?
Well, when was the building built? The church you were on staff at. That's when that was Cliff would have still been there, and I think you were just coming in just after that. So I'm thinking 2008, 2010,
So
somewhere in that
2006 is
range.
when the building was built, and I was
Okay.
interning for Cliff at the time. So,
Yep.
man, yeah, okay. Because I thought 2010 was when I first met you, but I had to have met you during that building project. I forgot you
100%.
were a part of that. So
Yep.
that's crazy, man. So this interview is going to feel a little bit different just because I feel like, we know each other really well, like, pretty intimately. We've worked together.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
War stories galore.
So I know you've also written a lot for a lot of publications online, but ProSoundWeb's been one of the bigger ones, and you
Yeah.
are current co-host of the ProSoundWeb's Church Church Sound Podcast. For
Yep.
some reason, I struggle with that podcast name. I don't know why, because it's like I feel like it's so like straightforward. Like, how did you get that podcast name?
Yeah, exactly. Well,
but
I was not the original on Church Sound Podcast. I want to give a shout out to Samantha for starting that, Samantha Potter. And when she got way too busy, I was asked to start filling in. And the minute I started filling in, she got another huge promotion and kind of had to disappear.
I
from
mean,
the
she's killing
podcast
it
just
over at
because of her
Allen
schedule.
Heath. So
Oh, she is. Yeah, she's amazing.
yeah. So then you and James have been kind of filling in and kind of are the official guys now for a little bit.
Yep.
Things are going well over there. Been really enjoying listening to your guys' podcasts. And yeah, I know me and you kind of talked about like, hey, what do we want to talk about in this? And I know you're really people oriented processes and stuff like that. So I think that that's going to be kind of more of the tone of this, if you're cool with that. And I just kind of want to pick your brain and, you know, get some insight from someone who's been in the industry for a long time. You cool with that?
Glad to do it, man. That's cool.
So you've worked in countless churches. What's the most common mindset mistake churches tend to make about sound?
Well, that's broad because there, part of me goes to the technical mistakes that are made of, that for some reason churches think they can, break God's laws of physics and do crazy things,
Yeah.
But I think the most common thing, that I see is there's a lot of thought about how important audio is, but there's not a lot of support behind behind that. Particularly, somebody coming in and gonna be the technical director or the front of house guy or whatever at the church. I think there's this expectation that, well, he's kind of like a musician in a lot of ways that, that person is. And so he's just going to come in and do his thing or her thing, and we don't have to invest in them. Like a musician learns to play because they've taken private lessons and, all of that or whatever they've done to, create their craft. The problem with audio, that's very hard to do because most people don't have an audio board set up at their house. They don't have, all those things. And so there's this expectation that it's going to be absolutely excellent. And where the person that's there is kind of learning on the job, in a lot of ways, and has no support or, investment in them to, further their craft.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. I feel like that was a drum we banged for a long time of like, because it wasn't super common. And now luckily a lot of consoles have the multi-tracking capability that you can record and do virtual sound check and be able to come back in and practice during the week. So that's been great to see that from a lot of the middle of the road, like, not the super high dollar ones, the fact that you can get it on a Behringer console and you can get it on some Midases and some Allen Heaths and the smaller Yamahas, like that's just awesome to be able to like have that tool now. When you walk into the church for the first time, like what's your go-to? Like, what are you first evaluating? Where are you looking first? Like, what's kind of that, like, I'm going to know all I need to know about what's going on here if blank is set up a specific way or if blank is missing, type thought process.
Yeah. Well, are you asking like if I'm going to come in and, mix a Sunday morning, I'm called and I'm coming in, or if I'm coming in just to, consult, what are we kind of looking at?
I think that in my head, I feel like for me, it's both. Like I do the same thing. Like I want to know like what I'm dealing with, whether I'm consulting or I'm just mixing or whatever. So I think, does that make sense? Like I think it's kind of both.
Yeah.
Like
it is. And I will say this, because I'm a relational person, I want to talk to the worship leader and the guy who's behind the soundboard and get a feel, for usually I'm trying to figure out why am I here? What do they want me here for? But also get a real feel for them and their, kind of understanding of what they're doing and understanding of, what they have, just kind of get that ground level. And also for me, it's very important, the dynamic between them.
Yeah.
Like, you and I have both walked into situations where it's like, oh my gosh, man, the worship leader doesn't know anything, but he controls everything this might
Oh
not
yeah.
be a great situation. Or the other way around, where the tech guy is like just bullying the worship leader with, tech talk,
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
for me, I'm always trying to evaluate, the people side of stuff.
So with that being said, like, what do you think is more important, the process and the relationship or the gear?
Oh, the process and relationship, 100%. You've heard me share this numerous times. My definition of excellence is doing the best you can with what you got every chance you get. And so when you have that attitude, I used to joke, and nobody will get this reference, but if I was doing a missions event and I showed up and it was a Shure Vocal Master system, said nobody but me gets that reference probably, but I could still have an excellent event because I'm going to do the best I can with the gear I have. And that, to me, that that defines excellence. So 100% on the people in the process. The gear can be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, the gear is just a tool. The tool can be fixed and the tool can be changed. The relationship stuff and all of that is much more deep and much more impacting on the overall result.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Like, culture is so important. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
I think I'll take a healthy sound culture over good sounding church,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because like,
Yeah. Yeah.
because everything that we're doing is people driven, right? We're calling
Yep.
people to Christ. We're being Christ-like. We're trying to drive people to Him, and we could have the most amazing sounding church music in the world, because your mixer is amazing and your PA sounds perfect. But if he's a jerk, you know, you're not gonna bring anyone to the mission, right?
Yeah. 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 Exactly.
So how do you weed those people out? Like, do you you walk into a church as a consultant because they're trying to figure out like why they can't keep volunteers or whatever, the case may be. And you start to kind of investigate and you realize that the sound guy's a jerk or the worship leader's super controlling. Like, how do you point leadership in the direction to solve those problems?
Yeah, part of this is, I'm sure, because of my age, and I find I have less patience perhaps than I used to. I just generally call it out. Hey guys, there's a rift here. We can fix all kinds of stuff, but until there is a healthy culture here, we're not gonna, you're not gonna be able to achieve the success. So if you don't want to work on your culture or you don't think that's part of the problem, I'm probably not your guy. And I'm willing to just, walk away from it.
Yeah. I mean, how often do you feel like that happens? Because like I've been listening to a lot of podcasts, and I feel like a lot of people have been talking about that jerk sound guy. And
Hmm.
I know that like there's like this old cliche of like the sound guy's grumpy, don't talk to him. Um,
Hmm.
I wouldn't say that I haven't met grumpy sound guys, because I have. But like I think about a majority of the guys that I know, at least in the house of worship world, I don't feel like most of them are grumpy. I I've watched guys that seem super cool get really frustrated really quick because they're not being treated well, or they're not necessarily that they're not being treated well, like sometimes that's it, but like it's like you guys just don't understand what I'm trying to get you to do, right? Because it's like the drummer won't play quieter and he's overpowering everything, and
Hmm.
the keyboard player keeps turning the volume up to 100% or down to 20%, or it's like the worship leader won't, on the pickup won't turn the low end down so that I can get the sound that we're trying to, it's just like, fine, like what am I even here for? Type thing. Um, yeah, I guess, like, do you feel like that's still a stereotype that we as church sound tech people still carry a lot, or do you feel like that's something of the past that we all kind of just joke about now based off of bad nostalgia?
Yeah. No, I think there's some reality to it because different personalities end up in different places. And
Hmm.
again, super generalization, but a lot of guys in tech end up being there because they're nerdy. They like the gear. They like all of that. And
Yeah.
I've, personally have done this, and I've also consulted with churches where I've recommended, this completely, in that I would much rather pick a musician to be my front of house guy and teach them all about the gear than try to
Hmm.
find, a tech nerd and teach them about, music and what, good sound is and, all that type of thing. So, and in general, again, I hate saying this, but it's just a real generalization. People that are nerdy communicate differently.
Hmm.
And that can be taken as very abrupt. So I think there
Yeah.
are some guys that have great hearts. They're great people. They're actually really good servants. But because they're a yes no guy, the musician feels like he got his feelings hurt because he got a no, and, or whatever. So, there's definitely that, piece of it. So, again, that comes back to that whole, relational thing and, understanding each other. And, as I look at today, when I look at somebody like, if the Lord called me back on staff at a church, I would go, try and recruit primarily musicians, but I'm sure there'd be other people, that'd be involved. And just because you're not a musician, because I'm not a musician. I'm not gonna, say you couldn't be part of the team or mix or whatever. But I'm gonna look for somebody that has good relational skills, and is not. If they don't have the good relational skills, they're willing to learn. They're willing to be
Yeah.
like, okay, I want to understand this. I want to be a good team player. And again, that goes all the way back to what we were talking about is the culture.
Yeah. What do you feel like for the tech directors that are listening? Like, what's one habit you would tell them to pick up?
Have a lot of grace. That's
Mm.
that's a general statement, but have a lot of grace. Have a lot of grace for the musicians. Understand some of what you're trying to do, but not all of what you're trying to do. So feel free. Don't feel free. You should be called to explain. I One of the things I do when I mix, at a place when I come in is I will always walk the room. That's partially just because I want to know what's going on in the room. I don't want to get stuck in the booth and as the
Mm.
room responds. But the
Yeah.
other part of me doing that is the musicians seeing me do that. And they're like, oh, he's out of the booth. He cares about what's going on in the audience, and if they're doing
Hmm.
something, I may even get caught up in a moment of, of worship or whatever, or, they're doing a big hit. I might, do a, big fist bump in the air or just something to let them. Yeah, exactly. Do the drum thing or just like, hey, I'm into this with you,
Yeah.
type of thing. And I think that, that helps, communicate that. But, you know, as tech people, we need to understand what the musicians are trying to do and what they're going through and all of that. And hopefully develop that culture where musicians also fully understand, what's going on the tech side. Cause
Yeah.
we're all artists working and I hate to use this term, but create the same product. We're all working to
Yeah.
get the same result. And we're all artists. We're just using different tools, different things, to create those moments or create that moment or to get people to engage, into worship.
Yeah. Leaf Fields recently said that if you aren't a musician, you can't be a great sound engineer. How do you feel about that?
Thanks, Lee. I appreciate that, buddy. Well, my common joke is, I played drums in school. I was in the marching band, and I was in a bass drum line of 5 bass drums, and I was the 4th bass drum, so I can count
Mm.
really well. I've got really good tempo and all that stuff. I played kit a little bit and played in the jazz band a little bit, but my joke is, on a good day, I'm a drummer. I'd say percussionist, but that implies talent. So I'm just a lowly drummer.
I can play drums enough to give you a sound check. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. Well, let me throw that back on you. Because I don't. You're not a classically trained musician.
I do not actually know how to play any instrument. I know how to play enough drums, like I said, to give you a good sound check. It
Yep.
might no one. It's not going to stop and turn anyone's head and go, Who's that?" Um, I know how to, I know how to hit consistently, so you can get good tone and EQ your stuff. There was a point in time where I knew how to string and tune guitars pretty well, but like I've never been taught how to play an instrument. And I mean, I will say I don't call myself a sound engineer. I know how to do it. I'm good at it. I'm
Hmm.
not great. I am. I don't feel like anyone's gonna go, "Oh, great, Justin's mixing," right? But I also don't think anyone's gonna be like, "Oh, great, Justin's mixing," right? Um, so I, yeah, that's just not me. So I guess there's part of me that like goes, do I think it's impossible for someone who's not a musician to not be a good sound engineer? I think that's a really broad statement, and I think that there's some nuance that comes with that. But I think if you, like most people talk about in generalities, and I would
Right.
say that
Yeah.
generally that statement is true. I think that
I would
if
agree
you're
with
not
that.
just talking, if you're not talking about, let's pick out every single individual person and say, this guy's an amazing sound engineer, but he doesn't play an instrument, you can find those guys. Are those rare? Yes, I think those are rare. Um, Overall, I would say that there's a lot of okay or good sound engineers that don't play an instrument, but I think that there's very few great sound engineers. So I think I'd agree with him.
Yeah, yeah. I would definitely agree. Like I like you consider myself the same way. I'm not, a great front of house guy, type of thing. I think I do fairly well at it, and I've done, some nice events and so forth. But there's a lot of guys that I look up to and I guess would aspire to be if I really wanted to get into it. And if I did, if that was like, hey, I want to go out and be a front of house guy and be on a, major tour or anything else like that, I would learn music first,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, and I think for me, like, I think what made me a good sound engineer, not a great one, was for a long time, my absolute love of music.
Yes.
And I mean, there was a time in my life where I was actively listening to music relatively, probably 80 to 100 hours a week. Just the work that I was doing just was 8 hours a day of put headphones in and listen to music. Podcasts weren't really a thing at that time. So it was like listen to music. For the longest time, I loved every style of music that wasn't country music. So it was like, you put my iPod on shuffle. Yeah, I'm going to go back to iPod. You put my
Hmm.
iPod on shuffle, and you'd get opera music, classical music, rap music, worship music, thrash metal music. Like everything you could imagine. At one point in time, I found a Swedish jazz hip hop group. That
All right.
yeah, which yeah, I think I didn't get into country music because it was all my parents listened to when I was a kid, and I think it just made me hate it. Now as I'm getting older, I am finding very genuinely good country music I enjoy, and it tends
Hmm.
to be a little bit more like old school style. Like I do
Yep.
really like Willie Nelson, and I've always liked Johnny Cash, but Johnny Cash has always felt more folky, which isn't quite country. It's like it gets kind of weird, but
Oh, yeah, country is
yeah,
such a broad genre that in and of itself. But
yeah.
yeah, that's interesting, and that's something I learned about you today that I actually didn't know. I mean, I knew you were a good front of house guy and so forth. And one of the things that I say to every volunteer that I talk to that if they're wanting to come and be involved in the team is, do you love music? And I think that's the most important thing, because I think if you love music you naturally, and listen to a lot of music, you naturally know the result you're trying to get. And then you can learn the tools how to get that result. But you have to know what you're looking for.
Yeah. All right. How do you feel about these questions? I'm just kind of rapid firing. I came up with a bunch of these like personnel questions. You doing okay with them? You want to talk about
I
something specific?
No, I love it, man. Keep them coming.
All right. So I'm just trying to think of like how I want to go about this, because like I feel like there's a lot of these that are kind of semi, like they're all important, but it's like sometimes like when you reread your questions, like you're like, that's kind of generic. And I don't want to be generic. Like I want to get to the meat of some things.
Yeah.
If you wanted to build a repeatable process for everyone, because most of our volunteers are now not tech people. They're going to volunteer
Right.
once a month, twice a month. And consistency is really important in my head. And I know it is for you too. If you wanted to but make the most repeatable situation for everyone, to get the most consistent sound from week to week when you don't have a hired full-time staff member mixing every single Sunday. What do you think the key foundational parts of that are? And what do you think, like maybe like narrow it down to like 3 things if you can, like just so it's a little bit more specific. Like what would be the 3 most important things to create that for a church?
Yeah.
Or 2 or 4, whatever it is.
Yeah. No, I've got at least 2, and I think a third one, definitely brewing. Because when you said that, one of them I hope kind of surprises you. But the first one I'll start out with, and it goes back to the culture again, and setting expectations, and people understanding the vision, and all of that is, in my opinion, still underrated. Because people are like, well, just listen to last Sunday and it should sound like last Sunday, and it's like, well, okay, but last Sunday was a whole set of different musicians. There's all these variables and all that stuff. And if I can get and understand the vision of what we're trying to do, and we're have a great culture where we say we want people to engage in worship, I may on a given Sunday, let's just pick a number, hit 98 dB peaks, even though our official rule is 95 dB peaks, because in that moment at that time, and then having the culture that gives you the freedom, to do that, and gives you the, you still have to have the boundaries and all the stuff. It's not just, go be loud for the sake of, being loud. It has to fit the moment.
Yeah.
But where, people are, engaged in what the overall vision and purpose is. So, having that kind of clearly, laid out and instilled into people. Second thing is virtual sound check. End of story, period. And, I did this before where I brought the worship leader in, and, we sat and played back and listened. And, it was excellent, actually. It was one of the best experiences I ever had. Was I had a bass player that I brought him out to front of house and said, listen to the way you're playing. Here's my kick drum. This is what I'm doing. And it was like, boom, and his eyes lit. And he was like, oh, so I'm like walking all over the kick drum and I'm like, yes, nice, but I really didn't have to say that. I mean, he just came out and experienced it, and it was just great. And that the bass player is still a buddy of mine. I mean, it was like a breaking point for us in our relationship. Yeah,
Communication is
exactly.
so big. Like, I remember like being in pseudo arguments with the youth worship pastor about like tone for the 2 guitarists, right? It's like they're playing the exact same tone, the exact same everything, and it's like they just sound like mush together, right? I can't tell that there's 2 different guitars except for this one's messing up more than this one, right? And it just sounds weird. And like it was like such a consistent problem until one day he wasn't leading and he just popped in to see how things were going. And I was like, hey, I'm like, I know we've kind of argued about this, and I'm not trying to be mean, but it's like, I want you to understand like what I'm hearing. So like, take a listen to this, and like was able to
Mm-hmm.
like bring one of the guitars down, and you couldn't hear anything change. Put them back up, bring the other one down, you couldn't hear anything change. I'm like, listen, man, like this is what I'm trying to explain to you. And it's really hard for you to understand that, it seems like, when you're standing up on stage holding your own guitar, right? And he's like, okay, that totally makes sense. And I'm like, right. I'm like, it just doesn't make sense to like have two kids playing the exact same thing with the exact same tone. Like, I'd like some definition. Like, let's like
Right.
change the
Yep.
tone for this one or this one, so that I can mix these guys in, and like people can actually hear them, right? And then it's like the students can go, yeah, you can actually hear me. Like that little beep beep boop boop thing was, that was me. Like, that's cool, especially for like youth, bands and stuff like that. So
Oh, sure. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it's great. Yeah. So yeah, the virtual sound check and the communication, things like that, I think are
yeah,
absolutely key. And again, take it all the way back to culture. You got to have a culture where it's acceptable and
right,
so forth, because that also could end up being into, well, why did you have the snare drum sound that way? Well, I don't think that sounds like the record. Why did, and it could be a very, very caustic environment if not done
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So
Did you have a third one or no?
yeah, I was going to say, let's see if the third one surprises you, because I usually don't talk gear, but if I was building a room or if I was looking at a renovation or something like that, I'd put in an immersive PA. I am
Mm,
150% in on object-based mixing, active acoustics, and the ability to separate things out in your mix. And
yeah,
with the new stuff that's out for, particularly, let's just talk object-based mixing, where you can look at a screen and I can we talked about guitar tone. I got two guys that kind of sound the
hmm,
same. I'm going to push this one guy to the back of the stage. As I push him to the back
hmm,
of the stage, the tone automatically comes down,
hmm,
and it starts to sound a little compressed and distant and so forth. And I can take the other guy and I can move him, forward. And now, even though they're playing the same things, they still are very, very distinct. And I didn't have to understand, oh, I want to separate these two guitar sounds. Well, let's think, okay, I'm going to go in at, 4K and shelve it. And I'm going to, add some more reverb to it and,
hmm,
whatever, all those things we do to try to create space coming out of left and right happens just in object-based mixing. So if somebody's looking for something that is extremely volunteer friendly, I like to use the example of, you've got a dentist who was a musician, but he's busy now and he can only volunteer once a month, but absolutely loves music, right?
hmm,
He doesn't have the time to learn all of the little nuances that you need to know to get it sounding good out of left and right. But he knows, hey, I can move this, guitar back, or I can push this singer. This singer, I can push her back in the mix a little bit. Or hey, let's bring this person, to the front of the mix, type of
hmm,
thing. And it's just literally moving dots, on the screen. And so, to create consistency is kind of where we, kind of started
yeah.
this, or, type of thing. That to
Set our set
me,
our set our teams up for success.
yeah, yeah, exactly. This, allows you to create consistency, and, and people are, able to use it and understand it as well. Cause,
Mm,
you kind of see it visually. I mean, the first time that, we were working together, the first time I mixed on an object-based mixing rig, and it was, just tracks playing back in our back, warehouse, and it
yeah,
blew me away. I was just like,
yeah,
I was like, wow. And now that I've implemented some systems and, worked for a manufacturer that does that, and have gone and heard it and so forth, we'll bring up Lee Fields again. I agree with Lee on this. It creates a much more consistent result across the entire listening plane. That was the
agreed.
thing that surprised me the most. Was like, wow, this is very, it doesn't matter what seat I'm in as much anymore. The
Yeah.
weird thing was I had to get over it because I'm so used to left right. you know,
Yeah.
First time I was listening to it and I'm like, oh, this sounds different, but what is it? And then after, mixing on it a bit and then, kind of doing the walk in the room thing was like, no, this is way more consistent than a typical left right setup.
Yeah. I will say I am also 150% in on the object-based mixing for those things. I think the big selling point for me was like not just hearing everyone say like all these things, but like when I actually was able to hear and see the EQs that were on the individual tracks, uh, and going, oh, okay, like because it's one of those things that like you don't really think about, oh, I'm taking this out to make this fit in there because of it being stereo. I just think of that because it's like I'm trying to make these things all play together, and I've just
Right.
always done that. And it's
Yep.
like, okay, well, why would that be different? And it's like, oh, that's different because I'm not having my guitar compete with my vocal anymore, right?
Yes.
Or my
Mm-hmm.
keys aren't competing with my guitars anymore because they're spread out, right? Like they're
Mm-hmm.
not full blast
Yep.
coming out of the same source. And so I have to EQ them specifically to get them to not just become one thing. So I think that was the big thing for me. If we go back to your first point about vision and things,
Yeah.
I asked this. Let me ask this question. I read a lot of business books just because I'm a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and one thing of the ones that I've been reading, from like Brandon Dawson to Dave Ramsey, to even Gary V, they
Mm-hmm.
talk about drilling into your staff the vision and mission like at nauseum, right? Like Dave
Mm-hmm.
Ramsey says, like we have our once a week meeting with the full staff and we go over the mission and the vision statement because we
Yep.
need to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Why are we here? What are we doing? What's our goal? Right? And if you don't have it drilled into your head, essentially, you tend to
Mm-hmm.
forget about it. And I I remember the first time I heard him say that, I was kind of like, man, that would get really annoying. But then I was watching, I don't remember, it was like a video or a documentary or something like that. And it was about advertising. And they were talking about like, you advertise a product that you're trying to push, right? You're trying to get it known. And then, but what about the products that you're like, why do I have to see 17,000 Budweiser commercials, right? Everyone knows who that is. Everyone that drinks beer is either that's their beer or it's not their beer. Like, why do I still need
Mm-hmm.
to see 17,000 Budweiser commercials? And the idea is that like if we stop advertising it to you, it leaves your head and then you don't think about us, right? And so
Yep.
it's like when I pair those two thoughts together, I go, "Oh yeah, so like that's why I need to make sure that my staff knows what our mission is, right?" Do you feel like that's something we should be doing with our volunteers as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think there are creative ways that you can, you know, keep the vision and mission out in front of people. It's not like we get up and, okay, we're going to read our vision statement. Yeah, you have to get people to own it. And if it's not
Yeah.
yours, if you don't own it, I was at a company where I worked really hard and to try to change the culture, and I didn't have the buy-in of the CEO, and I beat my
Mhm.
head against the wall for like 3 years, just trying and figured out that, unless there's full buy-in and everybody's on the same page, it's almost impossible to change a culture.
Yeah.
Culture is always hard to change anyway. But if you can get everybody, on the same page, and then the culture, once you own it, it comes out of everything that you do. So it's not,
Mm.
just like, hey, we're going to read the mission statement. I don't want to make this sound spiritual, but it is like, scripture. You can read scripture and it isn't going to change your life. Once you own the scripture, once you read it and own it and it becomes part of
Yeah.
you, it absolutely changes your life. And so getting people on that same page where, they believe in the mission, they believe in things that are going on, and creating that in your culture is really, I think, the only way that you are overall, greatly successful. And then sometimes it does mean, just reading the mission statement, but mostly it means living it out, like the company that I was at, that I was, trying to change the culture. One of our phrases was, one team, one customer, one company, because there was kind of this division in this company. And I could not get that to come together because the CEO came from one side of the company, and he was like, "Yep,
of course.
this is our side, kind of thing." But
we're the important ones.
yeah, exactly. We're bigger than you, or whatever, But once, if he had, bought into that, I think that would have radically, changed the culture. It would have definitely filtered down, through the company. So, I'm a huge fan of, casting vision, but also 100%, living it out, because you can say words, but your actions make all the difference. Like, for example, a church could say, we're a safe place for you to learn about God, and somebody comes in and volunteers and gets yelled at. And you're like, okay, maybe I did something wrong, and I understand and appreciate that, but this didn't feel safe to me. Nobody came and put their arm around me and said, hey, this probably wasn't a good idea. I got yelled at,
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I guess that brings me into my next question. What are some indicators that church audio processes are broken? Even if Sunday works, like, what are some good indicators that, like, it's still not working the way it should work? Because I feel like we can get through every Sunday, right? Like,
right, yeah,
nothing is ever going to be the end of the world, right? I just saw a post on Instagram where it was like their sound system just died, right? I don't know if like the power was an issue or something like that,
right?
And they were like, we had no PA, we had no soundboard, and they're playing, they're showing a shot of like the congregation just singing on the top of their lungs, right?
Right. Yeah, acoustic guitar, no mic, and they're off to the races. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Pastor talks a little louder.
Yep.
But like the fact that like nothing is the absolute end of the world, right? Like, what are good indicators that things are broken and not working and are going to cause division long term, or at least unhealthiness?
Yeah. The key one that I see all the time, and it has gotten better. I will say this over, you said I was, one of the original technical directors way back in the 80s, right? At that point, the church considered my position equal to the janitor. And again, not that the janitor or anything, but it was just like you're not part of ministry staff. You're not, or there's just a different feel about that.
I feel like most of us have been told we're here to serve someone else.
Yes. Right. Yeah, exactly. You're just kind of like, pushed off. But, the first thing that I see, when there's unhealthy culture is an us versus them, and it's, you heard me say it, TNT, tech and talent, and when you put TNT, it goes off, it can either, blow a hole in the side of the mountain so you can put a tunnel through, or it can kill people,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. So I guess, do you feel like, hang on, maybe not feel like, what's the word I'm looking for? Do you feel that there is an excellence expectation that's been given to sound techs that is within reality unrealistic because gear isn't done right, done well, it's aged, type thing. When we look at the 380 something thousand churches in America, like 98% of them are 200 people or less, right?
Right.
And
Yep.
so when you're looking at that, like most of these churches that I walk into were built in 1957 or 1964 or, 1971, right? And it's like the PA's been in there since, maybe then or maybe 1987 when Gary replaced it last, right?
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? Like, do you feel like there's a level of excellence that is expected that we can't meet? Like that excellence versus reality, like not saying throw excellence out the window because our gear sucks, but like there's only so much I can do with this.
Yeah, absolutely. You're playing in my head a little bit, referring to excellence and what I would consider perfection. Because I think people expect it to be perfect on Sunday. And again, going back to my definition of excellence of, hey, I'm doing the best I can with what I've got every chance I get, so I can have an excellent Sunday morning that maybe was fraught with issues because equipment failed. And again,
Yeah.
I did excellence, but the equipment failed me.
Yeah.
So, putting that a little bit aside, but there is this kind of perfection that's expected, type of
100%.
thing. And, again, I'll keep it, bringing it back around to culture and so forth. As somebody that is either a volunteer or on staff, at that church in the tech area, it is my responsibility to communicate with leadership what's going on. So I think a lot of people blame quickly. So again, and it is very true. Like, hey, this is all I can do with the equipment, I have, type of thing. Or we're going to have dropouts every week because our wireless is still operating in the illegal frequencies we're not supposed to be operating in. Forget the legal issues. It's just still not going. It's just not going to work well. So as somebody that is, involved in the tech area at that church, I need to communicate with leadership why it's happening and what's happening, or, get somebody or say, what, I'm not sure what the issue is. People are complaining because it's too loud here, it's too quiet here, it's so forth. When I play tracks and walk the room, I can kind of hear it, but I don't know why it's that way. Let me bring somebody in that understands this at a deeper level. Just like, you're going to take your car into the shop to get it worked on after, at least I am, after I just check the levels, right? Oh, there's oil in it. I don't know what's wrong, and I'm going to go, take it into the shop. You need to, bring somebody in. So, working with leadership, telling them that, communicating that. And again, that's all part of that whole big culture, that you want to create.
Yeah. All right, man. I got two things and then we'll wrap up. The last thing, what does it look like in your eyes for church sound to enhance and not distract?
That's good. That's good because I naturally go, well, it's like no interruptions, no anything. It's no, it's perfect, right? So now I'm on perfection. Which isn't it? I think it's doing excellence. Doing the best you can with every chance you get. Type of thing. It's being prepared. It's, engaging, because there are things that are going to happen and change. There are things that are going to frustrate you. There's equipment that's going to fail you. There are, so many things that are potential to be a problem on a Sunday morning. So,
Yeah.
To enhance what is there, I think you are getting people to engage and to experience, God, whether it's through preaching or whether it's through the music. So, using way too many effects on the band, so it becomes distracting, even though I have the ability. I've got my Waves, super rack all loaded up, and I can do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I personally have made that mistake where I literally had the technical director say to me, Gary, people need to worship. It doesn't need to sound like the album. And I was like,
Yeah.
ooh, because
Ooh.
I'm going after the perfect snares. I'm, all that stuff. And he's like, like basically, dude, you are taking this too far. You're making it about the music, not the music being part of the experience.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, you're right on. So, again, I'd go back to that thing of, doing the best you can with what you got. And, that's, and sometimes I think there are distractions because the Holy Spirit brings them in for a reason. Like you mentioned the church that, the church is singing at the top of their lungs with an acoustic guitar up front, and it's like, hey, there's no moving lights. There's no LED wall. There's no words on the screen. And we still had church,
Yeah. Yeah. 100%, man. I feel like that's good. I appreciate that. All right. I ask every guest this. I don't know if you've been watching and listening to the podcast or not.
I'm ready.
One piece of advice.
Yeah. The one piece of advice I would say, if you want to have a long lasting involvement, I was going to say career, but it doesn't have to be a career. It's just like, and I personally struggle with this. Okay, where, I want to be engaged in my church and I want to volunteer and I'm, not on staff and so forth. But if you want to do this for the long haul, which I believe you should, is you got to stay connected, most importantly, to God, to your faith, to your, to your belief. And secondly, you really need to stay connected with the team of people around you. And again, I'll bring it all the way back around to culture. Just get yourself involved in a group of people that you love being around, you love serving with. You want to be there on Sunday morning, not, oh, I have to be there. Oh man, sound check is at 7:30. Oh gosh, do I have to go this Sunday? And there, of course, we're human. There are days like that, and I'm not saying, but as the general arc of things, be at a place that you want to be there and you enjoy it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Gary, where can people reach you if they want to connect with you and pick your brain some more?
Yeah. Wow. Well, I tend to live this isolated life a little bit now. So, best place.
Carrier pigeon, smoke signals.
Yeah. I was going to say probably the best thing is, I'll go ahead and give my email address out because I do a little bit of social media, not much, these days and so forth. So it's just pretty easy. It's Gary Zman at gmail.com. And that's probably the best way to kind of, reach out and ping me.
Yeah. Do you still do consulting or have you kind of moved on from that for the most part?
I do it on very limited occasions. Usually it's a referral that comes in, but me, I love the church. I love the local church. It's always hard for me, in some ways to say no. But particularly if, for me, if somebody contacted me, like say a worship leader contacted me and just said, hey, really struggling with my tech team. And I was able to engage with their tech guy and can see there's a real desire there for this to work. I'm all in, I want to serve people. I want to serve God. And, so as opportunities arise, I still take it on. It's less than it used to be, but grandbabies and other things have kind of gotten in the way, but that's life.
I get that. All right. Awesome, man. I really do appreciate it. I knew that this was going to feel different from our other interviews just because we've known each other, but I just feel like we just had one of our normal phone conversations for the last hour. So, I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh man, it was great having you on. I appreciate you. Appreciate the what you're doing, and appreciate the podcast.
Yeah, man. All right. Thanks everyone for watching. Make sure you keep on enhancing, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and comment down below one of your favorite things about what Gary said. And if there's anyone else you want us to talk to, put their name in the comment as well. Thanks so much.